and welcome to the Marina Skua Podcast. I hope everyone's well, and we're now a decent way through May, and it's been such a lovely month. In the UK at least, the sun has been shining gloriously. The garden is now in full bloom, and I'll be showing you some of that later. I'll do a little update. And yeah, I've had the fortune to go out on a lot of lovely walks and spend some time in nature and enjoy some really nice weather, which has been great because my making time has been severely limited over the past few weeks. In the last episode, I was pleased with myself to the point of smugness about how much knitting I'd managed to get done. I tend to vent any anxiety I might be feeling into my knitting, and I am very, very bad at knowing when to stop, and so I carried on knitting to the extent that I injured my wrist. It's a thing that's happened before. A couple of years ago I had exactly the same thing. That was the point at which I switched from English to continental style, and I had been doing some colour work, and I thought I had fixed my English technique to the point that I could do two-handed colour work and it wouldn't make my right hand suffer. That has worked so far, as long as I keep an eye on it and notice when I need to break, and I did not do that. I did an enormous amount of fine colour work on a virtual knit night, not at all paying attention to what my body was telling me, and that was over 2 weeks ago, and I've not knitted a stitch since. So the things I have to show you are slightly fewer than they usually would be. But I'm going to go on in, and I've also got some other crafting for you later on. Now, the first thing I'm going to draw your attention to, which you may have noticed already, is the t-shirt I am wearing. This I showed in the last episode, where I think I was about halfway down the body, maybe? Can't quite remember. But I was definitely still working with both colours. So I'm very pleased with this, how this has turned out. I've been wearing it almost incessantly since I finished it a few weeks ago, and I'm so pleased with how it's worked. It fits really nicely, it's very comfortable, and I tried something new. I had never done an I-cord before, which is hilarious. Like, an I-cord is a technique that's well worth giving a go if you haven't already. I've been knitting for a very long time, and when I came to do it, it's like, surely I must have done one before. I haven't, but it was good fun, and I'm very pleased that I chose it for the edgings on this t-shirt. So what I did is, I had mentioned last time that I knew I was going to be a bit short on yarn because I was using 100 grams of linen and about 75 grams of hand-spun blue-faced Leicester. And so what I did is I put the sleeves on hold when I finished them. It's worked in the round, top down. You've got raglan lines there. And then I put the sleeves on hold. I worked the body until I completely ran out of the blue-faced Leicester yarn. Then, you know, that was somewhere partway through a round, and I just stopped there. I then put all of the body stitches on hold and used the linen to finish the neckline and the armholes. So I didn't do any extra knitting on the sleeves. I just left them where I had put them on hold and then finished them straight away. And then that meant that I could use all the remaining linen yarn for the bottom of the t-shirt. And I was slightly worried about that looking slightly unintentional, but I think it's actually worked out really nicely. So you can see this band here is where we just have the linen, and I just like the way that flows, and it's quite light and breezy, and yeah, it's worked out really nicely. So I'm very pleased with this one. The project notes are on Ravelry because I've done quite a few modifications to the pattern to make it work, but it is a pattern that I highly recommend. It's called Vanilla Heirloom by Marina Skua. So yes, that's this one. I don't think there's anything else I need to tell you about this. If you do have any questions about it, or about alternating and combining yarns, or making modifications like that, or you want to give it a go yourself, do ask in the comments below. Always happy to answer. Now, it would be very easy to sort of almost resent the project that has been the cause of my recent woe. However, I'm just very, very excited about the prospect of being able to get back to knitting it. I got carried away with it because I just love it so much. This is a design that I have been working on for a little while. This is going to be a yoke. I need to change up the cable size. It would be nice to do that to show you properly. However, my wrist is not yet up to it, so I'll have to wait another few days before I can do that. But I really, really love this design. I tried to do something a little bit different with my colour work. I tend to go for quite sort of almost geometric, abstract motifs with my colour work designs. With this one, I've tried to go for something a little bit more flowing and kind of almost Art Nouveau, arts and crafts inspired, and I wanted it to feel very natural and inspired by trees, like the branches and roots of trees, which will be more apparent when I get to the end of the colour work on the yoke here. But I'm loving how it's turning out so far, and the fabric is gorgeous. The yarn is, these are both by Garfenel. They've very kindly provided yarn support for this. The grey is an undyed Shetland yarn. This is number 2, so it's their sort of heavy fingering weight one. This colour is Shale, which is a nice light grey. And then the green is a dyed one. This is pure Romney, and it's Pentland. I always have to check what this one's called because Garfenel have 3 yarn bases beginning with P, and I always forget which is which. This one is Pentland, which is a 2-fold, as this one is. So there's one to the same spec. But they're different fibres, and this one is obviously dyed. So they've got a slightly different handle, but they complement each other beautifully. And I'm really, really loving how they're turning out. And I can't wait to share more of this with you. I am hoping, well, my original plan was to get the pattern ready for release sometime in the autumn. I'm still hoping to do that. It might just take another couple of weeks to get back on top of things, but I'm really pleased with this and hoping that I'll be able to get it out into the world as soon as I can, because I think it's going to be lovely. And yeah, that's all of my knitting for now. I had hoped to make more progress on my navy blue cardigan. I was just looking at that the other day because I think that's the first thing I'll pick up again when I start knitting. I think later this week I should be able to. That one is a DK weight yarn, so it's a bit heavier, and I feel like that'll be easier on my hands. And I won't be doing the colour work for a while, and I'm going to need to decide whether I stick with two-handed colour work or whether I go back to Norwegian style colour work with the yarns only in my left hand. It's all up in the air, and we'll see how it goes. Now, though I've been unable to do any knitting, and for a while couldn't do anything at all, I literally spent days on the sofa reading because I couldn't type, I couldn't even like chop vegetables for dinner and things. It's been very dull. I am keen to get back into some making, and though I'm excited about the knitting, I'm leaving it for a while because my hands still need to rest from this kind of activity. However, I am starting a little bit of weaving, which is a completely different movement. It doesn't require so much repetitive movement of the kind that knitting does. Once you get weaving, it's mostly larger scale arm movements rather than finger and hand movements. and I haven't done any weaving for a while. I did some in an episode quite a few months ago, possibly last summer. I think it was possibly about a year ago. I will link to that episode below if you want to see more of my weaving. But the way I've done weaving generally has been to make things like scarves and wraps, and often using multiple yarns for interesting textural effects. And this time I am keen to make actual fabric that I can use for sewing. So I'm aiming for something that I'll be able to make hopefully a dress or a skirt out of. I've chosen my yarns. I'm going to be using some Jacob's wool from Woolly Mammoth Fibre Company, which Emma sent me a few months ago. That was a limited edition, which is now sold out. I'm also going to be using my own Mendip 4-ply in a naturally dyed pale green colour. And I'm going to show you some of the process of actually setting up the loom, because it's a rigid heddle loom. As looms go, they're fairly inexpensive, and it's quite a nice, accessible way to get into weaving. And I'm more and more interested in creating the things I wear and the things I have in my home from scratch. So I don't want to necessarily get to the point where I am making everything out of hand spun, that I've dyed myself, that I've taken care of every stage of the process. I love projects like that. It's completely unfeasible for me to do that for myself for everything, and still be able to actually do work and things. But I do want to take more control of that process and create different types of fabric, because a lot of the things I want to make, that I want to include in my wardrobe, are not necessarily knitwear. I love knitting, I love the aesthetic of knitwear, but there are some things that I don't really want to knit, like skirts. I'm not keen on the idea of a knitted skirt. I'm not sure why. They look lovely on some people. To me it just seems boring, and a strange fabric for it. Boring as in the process of knitting. And weaving is a lot more economical in terms of use of yarn. You get more of an area of fabric for the same amount of yarn with weaving than you do with knitting, because knitting is a lot more three-dimensional. You've got the yarn looping around itself a lot more times, and so you end up with a thicker fabric that uses more yarn, and then crochet even more so. Weaving is fairly economical in that regard, and I'm going to be weaving with wool, which means that you can have the yarns somewhat spaced out, and because the yarns I'm using are both wool and spun, they will hopefully floof up nicely to fill the gaps to make a nice opaque fabric that I can turn into garments. So I'm going to show you some of that process now. So I'm setting up the loom in the garden because it takes a fair amount of space. I'm using the direct walk method, and it's just much easier to carry the table outside than to try and set it up in my kitchen, which is just full of other stuff. It's been a while since I've set up this loom. You can see it's a rigid heddle loom. It's a Kromsky one, and I did a fair bit of research when I got my loom just to see which one was going to be the most suitable, and I really liked this one because it came with the option of multiple heddle kits so that you can put additional heddles, so you can either do more complex weaving patterns or do finer weaving, so you can thread the warp through both sets of heddles, and that enables you to get twice as many threads in the width. Now I've done some approximate calculations to work out how much length I can get out of the yarn that I have for the warp. I have 400 meters,
And I've worked it out so that that is having the warping peg, which I'm just setting up, 1.5 meters away from the back beam of the loom. So you end up with 1.5 meters of warp. So I'm just measuring here from the warping peg to the back of the loom and moving the table with the loom on it accordingly. I've got the feet of the loom hitched over the end of the table so that as I'm warping it, the loom isn't going to drag, because you need an amount of tension in the warp, just to make sure that it's even all the way across, and it does have a tendency to pull the loom inwards, so it's just caught there. I usually warp from a ball or a cone of yarn, but because I've got this extra space because I'm working outside, I can take the yarn directly from the skein, which saves me a bit of time. So I'm just tying the first end of the warp onto the post there, which is I think that's technically the back beam. And then I'm just going to pull a loop through each of the slots between the heddles, and that's how you get the correct number of threads through the heddle in the first place. And then once this process is complete, which takes a fair while, you then cut the ends and then thread every other one through the hole in the heddle. And that means that when the heddle is raised, it raises half the thread, so every other thread. did my calculations so that I would be able to warp up the entire width of the loom, and this is the very last bit of the yarn, so you can see there I've just missed off the very last slot between the heddles. So considering my calculations were fairly rough and ready, I'm very pleased that I managed to calculate the amount of yarn correctly, because I didn't want to have either a lot of space empty on one side of the loom or a lot of leftover yarn. And and so it's worked out really nicely. Now all of the warp needs to be wound onto the back beam. This bit you can do by weighting the warp, because you need to have tension on it as it's wound on. I find it much easier to just borrow my husband, because it's so much simpler when it's a two-person job. You can do it on your own, but if you can get a helping hand, it makes it much quicker. To wind the warp evenly so that the threads don't all stack either on top of each other or fall into the gaps between, I include some scrap paper. This is just sort of recycled packing paper, but you can also use a bamboo mat that's woven up sort of as you would use for rolling sushi. And then I use the picking sticks that came with my loom, and it's just to help the yarn wind evenly, because it's really important to get an even tension on all of the warp threads. Now we need to secure the other end of the warp to the front of the loom, and to do that first we need to cut all of the warp, because if you remember they were looped over the warping post, which gives you a loop, and cutting them means that you have individual ends to thread through the heddle. I've left the loom overnight, and now it's a glorious sunny day, so rather than working at the table on the deck, I'm going to take the loom out onto the grass in the sunshine so that I can enjoy a little bit of sun whilst doing admittedly a rather tedious task. So if you can see, each slot between the heddles, so the heddles are the upright white plastic bits, and each heddle has a hole in it. Each slot between the heddles has 2 strands of thread where we pass that loop through them. And so now I'm taking one of those threads and passing it through the hole, which is what gives you the shed, which is the gap between the warp threads, which allows you to pass your weft thread through them to create the woven fabric. for the final stage of setting up the loom before I can start weaving, I'm going to tie on little bundles of warp threads onto the pole you can see there, and I tie them on using a square knot, which is a 2-stage knot. So I tend to do the first tying for all of the warp threads and then go through and check the tension of them, and then secure the knot with the second tie. And that means that I can ensure even tension across all of them. So at this stage you can feel with your hands which warp threads are more slack and which are tighter, and so you can just grasp the ends of the knot and adjust it accordingly, and so pull the looser ones a bit tighter to make sure that it's even all the way across, and secure the knots so that they're not going to come undone. Now, I take a slightly perverse enjoyment from using tools in the way that they're not intended to make things easier. So I use a drill and a chopstick and some coiled up bits of paper to wind my perns which go into the boat shuttle. The pern is like a little bobbin. I just make them out of coiled up scrap paper, and I secure the end with a little bit of sellotape. and then I just wind it using a drill with a chopstick in it, and it seems to be the most effective way to do it without buying specialised equipment, and I really enjoy that. I'm going to start weaving with some scrap acrylic yarn on a different shuttle. This is just to set up the loom, because at the moment where the warp is tied onto the front of the loom, it's obviously bunched into clusters. And so the first few picks, that's like the first few rows in knitting, I do with just scrap yarn, which will then be removed at the end. And that just helps to spread the threads out evenly before I start weaving with my proper yarn. With the scrap yarn, I'm just leaving a little loop at each side of the fabric, which will mean that those threads are really easy to pull out once I've cut them and want to remove them at the end of the weaving. So now that I have my warp threads evenly spaced out, I'm ready to start weaving with my actual weft thread, which is this nice naturally dyed green Mend It 4-ply yarn. It's slightly heavier than the warp thread, but I hope it's going to work out okay. I think it'll look quite nice. And I'm using a boat shuttle where you can see this pern just slots into the gap, and it has a couple of wooden wheels on the bottom of the shuttle which enables it to slide really easily across the fabric. Now that is just the beginning of what is going to be a fairly long process, because I'm going to carry on weaving over the next couple of weeks probably. I'm going to take it slowly, and I'm more limited in the time I can spend weaving than with knitting, for example, because with knitting I can just curl up in a corner of the sofa, whereas weaving requires a bit more space. But I hope, well, I have no doubt that some of you will be better and more skilled weavers than me, but I really hope that that process has been interesting and has maybe
encourage some of you to perhaps give weaving a try, because it's a really nice way of making fabric for things where knitting might not be as suitable. If you do have any questions about weaving, I, although not a super experienced weaver, will be happy to answer where I can, so please do add any questions or comments below. Now, as I've particularly been enjoying spending time in the gorgeous sunshine in the garden, I know that a lot of you also like to see what's going on and growing in people's gardens in different parts of the world, or maybe people who just grow different things. And so I'm going to do a little garden tour for you. I'm going to finish here, and then you can watch the garden tour if you choose to, because I realise that not everyone is interested in the gardening. But it's what I've been spending a lot of my time doing, and so I thought you'd enjoy. If you want to catch me between episodes, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Ravelry. You can also support the podcast on Patreon, where I record additional videos, usually on a specific thing that I'm making, and often it's a little bit more in depth. And you can also sign up to my newsletter on my website, and I'll put the links for all of those below. And until next time, I'll leave you with the garden update. Bye for now. Garden tour time. Now, it's been a while since I gave you a bit of an update, and so there are a lot more flowers and a lot more green than there was last time. So I'm just going to give you a quick look around. Got lots of seedlings here, all hardening off. Most of them are cucumbers and squashes. We've got some beans there as well. Got some amaranths and thunbergia here. Random little pot of chamomile, which sort of self-seeded and I just left to do their thing. I'm really pleased. The chamomile self-seeded everywhere and it's looking amazing. Quince and bay there. That bay very almost died, and I'm really pleased that it's coming back. It's looking really healthy now, which I'm very pleased with. We've got lots of nigella down here. We've got the crocosmia there, which hasn't flowered yet. That's a dahlia there that's got a little bit frosted, but I hope it's going to be okay. You can see these nigellas are just about to come out. We've got a spirea there. Foxgloves are doing nicely. These poppies are ridiculous. They've been growing all winter and they're huge. I mean, they're at waist height for me now, and they're completely covered in buds. So I'm expecting these to be out in the next couple of weeks. On the tripod at the back there, we have some sweet peas. We've got a few of those in the garden. Another dahlia there. I really like this combination here, where you have the red and white aquilegia at the front here, with the chamomile and the white lupin and the pinky red lupin and the foxglove in the background. I think that's a really nice combination. Rhubarb's doing nicely there. This campanula is going to be lovely when it comes out. This is black hollyhock, which did really well last year, and it looks like it's going to do even better this year, which is really pleasing because I didn't think it was going to come back. The tripods we've built, we made out of alder sticks, which were cut from a tree in front of our house, and I was not expecting them to sprout, so I'm going to leave them for the season, and then if we can dig them up and turn them into sort of tree cuttings, that could be really exciting, but I have no idea what we'll do with them, so we'll see how it goes. I love this middle bed here. It gets loads of sun. The chamomiles and the foxgloves and the lupins there, I think, are working really nicely.
The foxgloves are all Sutton's apricot. The chamomile is a corn or field chamomile. This lupin here is called terracotta, and this one is towering inferno. And you can see we've got achillea here, which is just about to come out into flower. And we've got a bee here on the lupin. They love it. I'm waiting for these bits at the front to fill out a bit. We do have plants in there, but they're just taking their sweet time. Now this is actually a path. It's got rather overgrown with the chamomiles, but I don't mind that at all because it's rather lovely. This is my little woad bed. So this is last year's woad, which is all going to seed now. I'm going to let it go to seed, but then gather it up as quickly as possible so that it doesn't go over the entire garden. And then I've got lots more seedlings that I planted in March this year. I've got some random chard there as well. And then this side, this is all onions. I've got a few rows of onions, currently overshadowed by this big kale, which is the last of last year's kale. Again, I'm letting this one go to seed so we can gather the seed. Here we've got a new little bed. Those two are little squashes, which I'm not expecting to make it. They were grown from seeds that we gathered from a squash we got in our veg box, and we have loads of them, so I'm not too worried if they don't make it because we have lots and lots of backups. So on this side is corn here. These are French beans. The corn I'm really pleased with. It's looking much better than I thought it would do because we had a few very cold nights that I thought they wouldn't enjoy at all. And the beans, interestingly, the ones on this side are doing much better than this side. I think because they're protected a bit from the wind by the peas, because the wind howls down here. So these are our peas. They're getting nice and tall, so I'm pleased with that. I rather like our little pea frame there. And then we've got our main crop potatoes. These are Maris Piper. I'm quite pleased with my little hurdle I built there to separate our sort of messy potting area from everything else. These are tomato plants that have yet to be planted out. And then here we've got tomatoes on this big frame. So at the front we're going to grow tomatoes, and then at the back we're going to grow squashes up the frame. It's possibly slightly too intensive in terms of how much we're hoping to grow in the space, but we'll see how it goes. We do actually have potatoes in here as well. They're ones that we planted at the end of last summer, which we really, well, they got frosted and so we assumed they died, but they've all come back this year. So we're going to leave them as long as possible before we dig them up to make space for the squashes and see if we get any potatoes from them. Here we've got beetroot with some mizuna in the middle. Got 2 rows of beetroot there and there. We've got, you can see some wool fleece around the edges, which we put down early to protect the small plants from snails and slugs. The jackdaws love it and so have been stealing the fleece for their nests for most of the spring, and I don't really resent them that because it's fine. These are our first early potatoes. These are called Sprint, and so we'll hopefully be digging those up in a few weeks. Then we've got here, this is our garlic bed. They're doing really nicely. I'm very pleased with them. I've had a bit of a count and it looks like we're going to have about 40 bulbs of garlic. So that's really pleasing because I use a load of garlic in cooking. And then we've got our broad beans here, which I didn't have high hopes for because we tried some back in the autumn and they did terribly. You can see there we've got beans coming along. And so hopefully that'll give us a really nice crop. And I like the way the sun comes through this middle bed here. It's really pretty. We've still got a lot of fence which we're trying to cover up, but it's taking its time. It's usually only later in the season that works out. This is our little salad bed. We've got a lot of spinach and some rocket. Don't know if you can see on the rocket. It's been munched by flea beetles, which are what cause these tiny holes, and they go for all the brassicas. Last year we had them a lot on our turnips. And as far as I can tell, the only thing you can do is to put down really, really fine mesh, and I can't be bothered. So they're still edible. You don't lose much of a crop, it's just a bit unsightly, so we're just leaving them. But those are about to bolt, so we'll pick them soon. We've got sweet peas coming here. I hope these are going to be nice. They're just going to be white sweet peas. Then we've got some sunflowers. We've actually already got the sunflower out, which is far too early, and it's very, very short. It's about a foot tall, which is quite silly, but never mind. Cotinus we rescued from the sad plant section of the garden centre last year. Lots of wallflowers, which we're hoping will flower soon. Our comfrey has been flowering nicely and always has bees on it. It's wonderful. And then this is the herb bed, which is just sort of a miscellany of herbs currently overtaken by chamomile. The gooseberries are coming along nicely. Let's see if I can find some for you. So last year we only got one gooseberry, and we've got a lot more coming along this year, so I'm very excited about that because I do love a good gooseberry. And then we've planted out fairly recently beans on this tripod here, and so hopefully we're going to have a lot of veg over the summer. And we'll be putting sort of tomatoes on poles in a lot of the gaps, because we have a lot of spare tomato plants, as tends to happen. But with my pasta making obsession, I'm fine with that, because it means that I can just make the pasta and then make sauce out of the tomatoes and the many, many, many basil plants that we have inside. So yeah, this is sort of... Ooh, I haven't actually properly shown you my amaranth. I hope this is going to come along well, because they can apparently be used for a red dye, so I'll be very interested to see how that turns out. I mean, it's fairly small at the moment, but hopefully later in the season they'll get bigger. So yeah, it still needs a lot of work, but I'm really pleased with how it's coming along. And it's a lovely space to spend some time in on hot days.